As we've been going through the Bible, every book, we're on Philippians today. And so if you have your Bible, turn to Philippians. And it's amazing as you're dealing with things, these books, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Philemon, are written while Paul was in prison. And if you go back in your life and you think about some of the times that were difficult, you go back and you think about those times, and when you retell them, you talk about, man, we didn't have much, or we didn't have this or that, and you call them the good old days. Everybody has these good old days they talk about. And now, what's interesting is you can go back to any of the hardships or circumstances you've had, and you remember fondly some things. The struggle that you had, somehow it's a little bit different. It's not like you were when you were there in the depths of despair, when you were involved in that grief, when you were involved in the heartache and the difficulty and all those different things. It's more difficult, it's painful, and it's agonizing when you're right there in the middle of it. But then when you can remove yourself, years later, you talk about it a little bit differently. I know that there's been families that have struggled and fought over finances, and they were just difficult. They're painful. We've got this amount of money. What are we going to spend it on? Because we have this amount of bills. And we have more bills than we have money. So how are we going to figure this out? And so you start cutting things. And so, kids, maybe don't get the food that you would like to feed them. They don't get the quantity that you would like. They don't get the quality. And maybe you have to, you're rationing electricity, and you're just trying to keep the water on even though you don't have electricity, and maybe you have electricity for a little bit. You're just going back and forth. You're trying to figure out those things. And during the struggle, it is so tough. But then later on, when you come through it, you can talk about it totally differently. And it's just amazing. And you think about your struggles, your situation, your circumstances, the dark times, the difficult times. I hope you turn to Philippians and you think about how we should have joy and that we can have joy in spite of those difficult times, in spite of the time that maybe you're going through right now. Now, there's a difference between joy and there's a difference between happiness. They're not the same. One is temporary and one's eternal. And if you look at happiness, everybody in the world wants to chase down happiness. They want happiness so badly, they'll do anything. And so there's advertisements on TV about how to be happy. Well, they're talking about, buy things. That makes you happy. It makes you happy for a little while. I believe I told you this one lady, she had a spending problem. And she was so excited. She talked to me. She said, man, I got the best deal on this dress. And I was like, really? And I was like, yeah. And she talks about how great of a deal that she got. And then she's like, hey, do you know anybody that wears a size 15? Because it didn't even fit her. She just knew it was a good deal, and so she bought it. She was just buying stuff because it made her happy. And so knowing that happiness is fleeting. Because now all of a sudden she's got this dress she can't even wear. She doesn't know anybody that has that size. She's looking around for people. We sit there and we fight for happiness. That's what Ecclesiastes, it talks about in chapter 2. All these things he did to try to find happiness. And it evaded him. It just slipped through his fingers. And then the opposite, then there's joy. And joy is internal, it's intrinsic, it's in you. And it's something that we can have, a promise from God that we can have. Because it's lasting. It's internal and it's eternal. We can have this joy. And here Paul is talking about we can have joy in spite of. And here's a man that's in prison. And he is not just in prison. He is in prison and he didn't do anything wrong. He didn't look at anything wrong. He didn't look at anybody wrong. He didn't say anything wrong. He didn't talk to anybody wrong. He didn't say anything that was sinful, that was incorrect whatsoever. Not by God's or by man's. But he is in prison nonetheless. And so he has a different take on it. If you lose your freedom, man, I don't know that I would have that take. And I pray that when those circumstances come up that I have this, because this is the real aspect, the real challenge and the test of your Christianity is when you're going through it, can you still have joy? And I know some of you are going through those difficult times. They're going through them right now, and you don't have joy And this lesson's for you. It's for all of us. When we don't have the joy that we ought to have. And so, in verse 12, we can have joy, number one, in spite of chains. He had joy in spite of the chains that he had. It says in verse 12, it says, I want you to know, brothers, what's happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. Now, what'd it take? I'm in prison, and I'm saying, hey, this is really a good thing. Because the gospel is spreading. That's why this is a great thing. I am excited. I am happy. I am joyful. I may not be happy about it, but I'm joyful about it. Because the good things are continuing to go on. This good news is continuing to spread. So no matter what is going on, in spite of those things, I can have joy. And he says in verse 13, so that, he's talking about it spread, so everything is really served to advance the gospel. And so it's become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. He's saying everybody knows why I'm here. Now there's a reason why everybody knows why he's here. He's saying everybody knows why I'm here because I'm telling people why I'm here. I'm here for the sake of the gospel. I'm here for Christ. And people can't stop talking about it. And so everybody knows why I'm here. This is advancing the gospel. This is a good thing. So no matter my freedom's taken away, this is something that is good. And he goes on in verse 14. He says, and most of the brothers, having been confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. So not only has it affected me, and there's people that are imperial guards that wouldn't know about the gospel if it wasn't for me being in prison. And he goes and he says, and these people that they may know me or they may just know of me, they become confident. These Christians, these fellow brothers and sisters of mine have become confident. In my imprisonment, all of a sudden now they're talking boldly. Now they're sitting there and spreading the good news. And so he says, man, I can have joy. I can have joy being here in spite of it. In spite of the fact that I'm really, truly innocent. You know, on TV, there's people that say they're innocent all the time. This man was. And he's saying, I can still have joy. He can still smile because no matter what Satan's trying to do, the word is spreading. And in our lives, sometimes we let things break us. We let circumstances and situations break us. And we let those things dictate how we're going to feel that day. And we look at all those things, and here's a man who's saying, man, I've got joy. I've got joy in spite of it. Matter of fact, if you read, and hopefully you will, you'll read all through Philippians today, 4 chapters, and you'll see how many times it talks about rejoicing, how many times it talks about joy. It's over and over, and there's these different people that try to steal your joy all the time. And Paul's saying, don't let them do this. They've taken my freedom away. They've taken my liberties away, and yet I can still have joy. And you think about the circumstance, the trial that you're going through. No matter how bad it is, you can still have joy. You may not be happy about having to deal with it and having to go through it, but you can still have joy because God can still work through your pain. Point number 2, the critics. Man, there's all kinds of critics. And sometimes we let what folks say hold us back. And in verse 15, it says, some indeed preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. But sometimes, at verse 15, sometimes that's what we focus on, the first part of that verse instead of the last part. It says some, speak of Christ out of goodwill. They want good to come from this. But we don't focus on the good sometimes, we focus on the bad. And here he says in the first part, some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry. They're just trying to do it to hurt me. He says there's people that help and there's people that hurt. There's people that help and there's people that harm. And there's 2 types of people there. The people that help you get closer to Christ and the people that hurt you and get you further away from Christ. And he says in spite of those 2 different groups, he says, I'm going to focus on those people that are doing it for goodwill. But these people that are still talking about Jesus and they have bad motives, at least Jesus is being preached. And because of that, I'm going to rejoice. I'm still going to find joy in this. And so no matter what, I'm still going to talk about it. In verse 18, he says, what then? only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and that I rejoice. Because look in verse 17, it says, the former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. And he still says in verse 18, I'm still going to rejoice. I'm still going to have joy no matter what the situation. And so there's going to be people that are going to be critics in our life. They're going to say things about us that are not true. And it doesn't take very long. You've probably experienced it in your life multiple times, people lying about you, saying things about you that are untrue. But here, Paul's saying, I can't say anything. I'm in prison. I'm trying to reach the people I can, and I can't say anything to refute those people outside that are causing me harm. But it doesn't matter, because I can still be joyful. I don't have to wait till I get through it. I can be joyful while I'm going through it. Point number 3. Point number 3 is crisis. We can have joy in spite of the crisis. We can have joy in spite of the chains. We can have joy in spite of the critics. And we can have joy in spite of the crisis. And there's so many different situations that come up. And when a crisis comes up, I'm telling you that it seems as though sometimes you just want to laugh because it's one thing after another. You know, when it seems like a crisis hits, then there's another one, and they just keep stacking on each other. And sometimes you're just looking, if you're like me, just looking back and forth saying, are you kidding? Is there anything else? And then next thing you know, there's something else. And you're like, I shouldn't have asked. Man. And so it was amazing. It was a couple weeks ago, and it was at school. I won't tell you all the situations that came in, but this lady came in, there was a situation. And then one of the coaches called, and there was a situation. And then here in the office, there's a situation. And it just kept piling up. And I was just looking around thinking, this is crazy. But this happens all the time in our lives, where you get a phone call with the news, whatever that is. You get a call about this news. And then you have someone comes over and they share something else with you. And then you go to the house and you find something else there. And then it just keeps piling up. And it just seems like some days it just is overwhelming. All the things that you're learning about and finding out, all the crises that happen and that are coming down on you. And here's a guy that's saying, we can have joy in spite of it. Because I'm telling you, there's a lot that's been piled on me. I'm in prison. People are saying things about me to harm me, to cause me difficulty while I'm in prison. So I've got my own crisis to deal with. But through all that, I can still have joy. In verse 19, he says, well, at the very end of verse 18, he says, yes, and I will rejoice. For I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance. This crisis is not going to break me. This crisis, I'm going to find joy while I'm going through it, not after I get out of it, but while I'm going through it. And so sometimes we let the situation hold us back, and we make excuses for the reason why we don't live the way we should. Well, if you'd experienced the things I've experienced, you'd understand the way I am. You'd understand the way I live and the way I talk and what I'm doing. Because we can't focus on anything else. When a crisis happens, it takes us off our path. It talks about we're supposed to be in 1 John walking in the light. And sometimes we allow things to take us off. And a crisis does a good job of taking us off. That's why Satan puts it there. That trial is put up there, that temptation, whatever's going on, it's put there to take you off course. And it's put there because it works. It's very effective. And Paul's saying, man, I can have joy. I've got a crisis going on. And I can still have joy in spite of all this. And I'm not waiting until I get out of prison to have joy. I'm finding joy right now, every moment. I wake up, and you can wake up every day and decide, am I going to be joyful and just give it to God, or I'm going to let the circumstance and the crisis take over? He says, what's happened to me is actually turning out for my deliverance. This is all working out. Now, what an attitude. Everything is working itself out. And then in verse 20, he goes on and says, as it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be ashamed. I will not at all be ashamed. But with full courage now, as always, Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or by death. I don't know if I'm going to die here in prison but I'm going to be joyful because I know he's got me. And I don't know if I'm going to live and have a long life here in prison or if I'm going to be released. But I'm going to be joyful because he's in charge. And so this is all going to turn out for my deliverance. And it says, there's an eager expectation and a hope. That's a person that has joy. There's no doubt they know who's in charge. And he goes on in verse 21 and says, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. Man, there's no better mantra right there is to live as Christ, to die as gain. It doesn't matter. It's exactly what took place when Reagan was going to the hospital and Edward said, hey, it's a win-win. No matter what happens, we win. And that's what a Christian is. No matter the crisis, we win. It's a win-win. And so Paul understands to live is Christ. To live means I'm going to be living for him. And to die means I've got the reward. That's what we're here for. And so while he's not pushing death, he's just saying, if I die, that's what I've been waiting for. That's what I've been living my life for, to get this reward. And living here, I'm going to keep living for him. And so no matter how bad of a situation this is, this crisis that I'm going through, I'm going to have joy because it's going to turn out. He's in charge. I've got full confidence that he's got me. And I don't have to wait to get to the other side to say, well, I'm glad it worked out the way I wanted to, so now I can be happy about it. He says, I can have joy in spite of it all. Then, point number 4. Joy in spite of conflicts. And there are so many conflicts, and those things hold us back. Sometimes it's what people do, it's what people say, it's the things we're involved in. There's these conflicts that happen. And in verse 27, he says, only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. So whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit and of one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. He says it doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter what they're trying to do. And trust me, I'm in prison. I know they're really coming after me. It doesn't matter because I can still stand. And he's telling them, stand. Stand firm no matter what. You can have joy in spite of the conflict and be of one mind. And keep striving side by side. We're in this together. This is a partnership. Be bold. He's saying that through all this conflict, we can have joy. Because we get to determine and we get to make the decision of how we're going to let this conflict affect us. And when you get a chance to make that determination of how it's going to affect you, you can have joy because you know he's in charge. He goes on in verse 29. For it has been granted to you for the sake of Christ that you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake. So Paul says, hey, it's coming. I'm telling you, I'm experiencing it now, but it's coming for you. And it's been appointed for you to suffer for Christ. If you're going to be a Christian, you're going to suffer for him. You're not going to have the same opportunities that maybe a non-Christian has. You're not going to be included sometimes. You're going to be made fun of sometimes. But you're not living for them, you're living for Christ. I can't tell you how many times that there's certain invites I don't get. And I don't mind. There's certain times that I'm not involved in certain conversations. And I don't mind. And there's certain jokes that they'll tell other people. And then when I come in, they'll say, Todd doesn't want to hear about that. And they're right. I'm not included in some of those things. And that is okay by me. Because we're living for something greater. It doesn't matter the chains, the critics, the crisis. It doesn't matter the conflict that we have. We can have joy in spite of it all. This is an amazing story of a man who's sitting there talking to a group of Christians in Philippi, saying, your struggles, I understand. Your pain, I understand. The situations, I understand. The circumstances you're in, I understand. I know it full well because I'm experiencing the same thing. I know what it's like to have dark times. I know what it's like to be in despair, to have grief, to have heartache. And there are seasons of our lives that we face the same things. This book is saying you can have joy in Jesus in going through all of those. And think about when you have joy, you can't help but talk about the good news. You can't help but talk about Christ. And I would imagine there's someone in your life that's looking at you going through the crisis that you're in. Looking at you going through the circumstances, going through the struggle, going through all these different things. And if they see joy in you, they're going to want to know about the hope that lies within you. Because that's not normal, to have joy in spite of all of it. And you're going to have an opportunity to share the good news. If Paul had not been in prison, the whole imperial guard in verse 13 of chapter 1 would have not have known about Christ. And so look at the good that can come from your struggle. There's someone else that can benefit from you that's watching you and looking at you. And I don't know the different prayers that you've been praying and the different struggles you've been going through. I know some of them. I know some of them are pretty big. And I will say that if you want to let us know what we can be doing to pray for you, we will. And those emails that we send out, they're just not emails. There's people that are praying behind every email address. They're praying specifically for that person. And we would love to pray for you. And if you hadn't put Christ on baptism and you're not exactly sure exactly what that is, then let's talk about exactly what it talks about in Romans chapter 6, verses 3 and 4, where it talks about how you get that new life, how you're buried into Christ. It talks about the mode of it. You're buried into Christ and you come up, you die with him and you raise with him to walk a new life. It talks about in the first verses of chapter 6 about how you don't keep sinning, so you repent. You change those things. There's belief that's involved, otherwise you wouldn't do any of it. But if you have questions about how to become a Christian, let us know what we can do. But don't wait, don't hesitate. Please come while we stand and sing.